Hello, I'm Eric Olson. Welcome to this On Cue Insights special that we're calling Drug Storm. Just look at the local headlines online or pick up a recent copy of your local newspaper, any paper in our region for that matter, and it's likely that you'll see news on the front page of a drug bust or even a drug overdose. And we're not talking about alcohol or even marijuana, but the headlines in southern Minnesota and northern Iowa filled with incidents involving drugs like heroin and methamphetamine. And many of those users that we read about suffering with these addictions are young people in their 20s. Many experts, and some of them right here at this table with me, tell us that these drugs are easily found today and out in the open relatively via social media and through friends, other networks. Hard drugs, it seems, are no longer hard to find. Seems we have a drug storm on our hands. The problem has been identified and there is help out there. We're going to talk about that because we have some great stories of hope here with us at this table. But it can be tough to find that help and to reach out and locate it. Here to educate us on this epidemic are our guests. Dr. Michael Bruner, he is Clinical Director of Fountain Centers, which is in Albert Lea, the Fountain Centers program. And to my immediate left, Samantha Freeman, Albert Lea native and person in recovery. On my right, Laura Peters from Austin, now lives in the cities, also in recovery today. And finally, Debra Schmitt, probation officer, Moore County. Thank you very much for joining us, and congratulations to you too on your ongoing recovery. Doctor, I want to kind of start with you to identify the size of the program. There was just a piece in the Star Tribune, Minneapolis Star Tribune the other day, kind of crunched the numbers, Minnesota in the state. And state records, they said, show 336 deaths last year linked to excessive or abusive use of prescription opioids like oxycodone. So that's not even heroin. People might be confused about that connection. Can you kind of put it into focus for us?
Yeah, so yes, there has been an increase in overdose deaths in the state of Minnesota and nationally, and a lot of that's driven by the abuse of opioids, which includes pain medications as well as heroin. So dramatically so in some cases. It's affected nationally. We're seeing it in the data much more significantly than in some areas of the country. We're seeing it in the state of Minnesota, and in particular in the Twin Cities, some dramatic increases even in heroin use. Different trends down here in southern Minnesota. So there's some issues that still are out there as it relates to opioids as to whether it affects this part of the state as much as it does other areas of the state.
Okay. And then there's opioids, and then there's the other problem I'm hearing talking to experts of methamphetamine, meth.
Yeah.
Which is different than opioids. Can you explain that to folks who might not know?
Yeah, and they have a much different effect in terms of the brain, and then what it has the effect on the body as well in terms of how people react. So opioids generally slow things down for people. It makes things more mellow and calm, whereas methamphetamine does the exact opposite. It speeds things up. It keeps people more alert and drives down sleep problems. So that's the nature of the drug. What we're seeing nationally with methamphetamine is it's pretty steady, and we haven't seen a dramatic increase or decrease in methamphetamine. However, here in Minnesota, there's actually a dramatic increase in the use of methamphetamine, just like heroin and other opioids. But locally is where we seem to experience the most significant difficulties with methamphetamine, dramatic increases locally. So methamphetamine is really the driver of problem drug use here in southern Minnesota, more so at this point in time even than heroin.
And you're seeing that in your program with folks who are coming in for help?
Yeah, for sure. Methamphetamine is now the second leading drug that brings people into treatment at Fountain Centers. First being alcohol, it always has been, probably will be. Methamphetamine has surpassed marijuana as being the drug that brings people into treatment at Fountain Centers, and we've never seen that before. And then when we look at opioids like heroin and prescription medications, they're still low for us. They're about 4% each and have been that way for the last 5 years or so. So while we're seeing dramatic increases nationally and in the Twin Cities in terms of heroin and prescription drugs, we're not seeing that so much here in southern Minnesota. Now, importantly so, in talking to my EMS colleagues, those are the folks who go out on runs for people who are impaired, we're actually seeing some increase here in the Malheur County area as opposed to, say, Freeborn or over in Albert Lee. So we're kind of keeping an eye on that in terms of heroin and overdoses with prescription opioids in terms of the effects in this part of the state.
And Samantha Freeman from Albert Lee, tell me your rundown on how you became using and then finding recovery. When did this journey begin for you?
I'm 28 years old now, and I started using when I was 12.
And when we say, I'm sorry to
No,
interrupt,
you're fine.
using, what drug of choice is that?
What I started using, it started with alcohol, and then it went into marijuana, and then probably about a year or so later, it started to be meth, crack, heroin, and it just spiraled out of control with that.
Over how long a period of time do you suppose?
I've been using since I was 12, and as long as I've been clean, and I've been clean 2 years, it will be on May 25th of this month. So I've been using that long.
And we were talking beforehand, you looked quite a bit different.
Oh yeah.
And you remind yourself of that, it helps you.
Yes.
In you were not feeling well and you were not looking that well.
Yep.
In the throes of your addiction.
Yeah, about a little over 2 years ago, I would say almost 3, I weighed normally, which I would say about 130, and I dropped probably within 2 months all the way down to 82 pounds. So it's, when it gets a hold of you, it gets a hold of you, and it takes over your soul, your body, everything.
Hijacks.
Oh yeah.
Hijacks the brain. Debra Schmitt, it was interesting to hear first alcohol to marijuana, then to a harder drug. And with the folks you deal with, I would have thought that that's not the same MO but it is, I guess. These are gateway, that's the term they used to use, gateway drugs, alcohol. Is it still the case?
Correct. The people that I work with, they tell me that they don't just start off using the heroin or the meth. It's usually a gradual process of erosion. So, like Samantha had shared, starting with the alcohol and then graduating to marijuana use, and then from there, exploring and using other chemicals that are addicting.
And how many clients do you deal with on any given time who have are coming out of a drug problem?
I would say,
in Mower County.
I would say 3/4 of my caseload are either drug or alcohol related offenses.
And how did they, for the drug folks, was it the same people? How do they make access with the drugs? Is it just like at a party somewhere and they say, hey, you want to find this? Or do they go out seeking it? Hard to put a generality
I think
to it?
it's kind of hard to pinpoint, but I think sometimes it just starts with the peer group that they're hanging out with. And, they're at a party or whatever it may be, and then, they start experimenting, whether, first starting with marijuana, and then maybe it's, I tried this, or, it kind of starts with like the people that they're hanging out with.
Mm-hmm. Laura Peters, I saw you nodding your head when Debra was talking. Is that your experience?
Yeah, definitely. The first drugs I used were alcohol, weed, cigarettes, and that was with a very close family member of mine who was also in high school with me, and also my close friend group, and we were all just risk takers, so we all liked to experiment, and that's how it all started.
And then how did it progress? You were in Austin at that time?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did it progress?
For me, it kind of seemed like every year I was just trying something harder. Like 8th grade, I was trying weed. 9th grade, I was drinking more. 10th grade, I was doing ecstasy and stuff like that. And so stuff just got, I would say, boring, and just wanted the next best thing, and you're chasing that next best high. And I don't know. It just, yeah, progressed.
Where
like
did
that.
it end for you? Which drugs were you, before you sought help, what were you taking?
Heroin is what I would say brought me to my rock bottom, but
And that's been a couple of years now, I think, right? A year and a half?
yep, I've been sober for 19 months now.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
And did you attend a treatment program? How did you become ready to do that?
September 2014, I entered Hazelden in Plymouth, Minnesota, and I spent 60 days there for treatment. Later, moving to a sober house after that for a year, and then doing all the drop downs of treatment, IOP, EOP, day treatment, and continuing going to meetings and whatnot. But what kind of brought me into treatment was I was just miserable. I had tried getting clean before then, and I couldn't do it without, for me, I personally couldn't do it without getting away and going to inpatient treatment. I tried outpatient here in Austin, and I needed the full detox, and to get away from my using friends, I needed a new surrounding, so.
And that's a common refrain that, you know, it's so hard with these tough drugs like heroin because the person gets sick many times. I think, Deborah, right? If that, you run into that with your people you counsel?
That is correct. That's what they tell me. I actually have a couple right now that are currently in the methadone maintenance program over in Rochester. They tell me that they would not have become sober had it not been for the methadone maintenance program, because it helped them get through being sick, the flu-like symptoms that are 100 times worse than having the flu.
That's what you get when you're trying to stop using, is that right?
Correct.
Did you experience those, the sicknesses?
Yep. After about probably 8 hours of not using, I would start to experience like hot flashes, being really cold, throwing up, diarrhea, stuff like that. So that's why you just kept using. And at first I thought, I'm just not quitting heroin because I can't get through withdrawals. I didn't understand that there was actually like a chemical imbalance or something in my brain. I didn't understand that it was a disease, and I thought the withdrawal was keeping me in there, but to keep using. But I now know that it's a disease, and I was using because I wanted to get high too. So.
Samantha, did you have some negative effects at first when you were in recovery, got sober?
Yes, I didn't have to go to treatment this time. I went when I was very early, probably 15. But I've been in and out of the program, I would say, since then. So I kind of knew what I had to do and how I would feel with the withdrawals and everything. But yes, it does make you sick. It makes you violently sick. Shakes, throwing up, sweats, cold sweats.
So that's what keeps a lot of folks from wanting to quit.
Yes.
I'm guessing.
To
Doctor,
use.
Is that a tough choice for a lot of the folks when they come in? They know they're going to get sick, and that's why they don't want to stop.
Yeah, for the opioids, including heroin and the pain pills, in fact, that's one of the main drivers. People initially get started because they experience euphoria and a rush of pleasure, but that diminishes over time, so you don't experience the same sort of rush. And what people report is the reason that keeps them using, and again, we're talking about heroin and pain pills, is because of the terrible withdrawal symptoms. It does change the brain. It makes some neurochemical changes in the brain that ultimately, if you don't have the drug there, then the brain and the body react with the terrible withdrawal symptoms. So that's really profoundly how the opioids work. The methamphetamine and stimulants work somewhat differently, quite a bit differently actually, and it's not as much so the withdrawal per se that drives people to continue to use. It has more to do with ongoing stimulus in the environment. So things around people remind them of using, so much so that they're constantly driven to use over and over again, because everything and everybody they come in contact with is related to past use of the drug.
Deborah, are these drugs, I mean, am I overstating how easy it is to get drugs in this region?
Not at all. It's very easy to get drugs from what I'm told.
And you see it at Moore County in corrections that, well, shucks, I was just looking at the jail. I pulled up the booking information from yesterday, and it was over half of the people that were in jail were there for not marijuana or alcohol or something else. It was just for those class of drugs, 25 out of 50 of them.
Correct, yes. It is very easy to get. And, I think too with the heroin that we're seeing, it's fast money. And so, when you have people that are dealing, these drugs, or the dealers that are dealing, it's fast money. It's these heroin users are getting sick, so they'll do anything to get this drug. So then it's a moneymaker for the dealers.
Oh, so that's their tactic then. They know the people are sick, and yet they keep selling it to them. Okay, I'm learning.
Supply and demand, yes.
Okay, and was it easy to find even in our area here?
Yeah, and it was easier for me to find heroin and meth than it was for me to find marijuana and alcohol. I'm under 21, and if I wanted to find alcohol, it would have been easier for me to just say screw it and buy heroin, because that's what I knew how to find. And it was, I guess it's also who you surround yourself with, and all my friends were heroin users, but also the dealers could price heroin at any rate, at any price, and any heroin user would still buy it.
If they knew they were that desperate, And there is hope, though. Obviously, you talked about who you surround yourself with, and that's part of getting well, getting better, and finding treatment. We have solutions. They are there, folks, and things that parents can do, things that friends of others can do, and some resource material. We're going to talk about that when we come right back to Drug Storm. We'll show you one simple tool in particular that just could save a young person's life. Stay with us.
Further information about identifying addiction and what to do about it can be found at drugabuse.gov, minnesotarecovery.org, or visit the Facebook page of Circle of Hope Austin MN. Or you can call Fountain Center's 24-hour drug hotline, 1-800-533-1616.
Welcome back to this On Cue Insight. I'm Eric Olson. We're calling our program Drug Storm, and we're talking about the pain of drug addiction in our region and where help can be found. I'm happy to reintroduce our guests, Dr. Michael Bruner, Clinical Director of Fountain Centers, Samantha Freeman from Albert Lee, Person in Recovery, Laura Peters, Austin native, also in recovery, about 2 years, and Debra Schmitt, Probation Officer, Moore County, who meets and helps an awful lot of people. And you give them like resources, try this, try that, and check in with them if somebody is involved in the courts, in the legal process of a drug conviction. Is that when you will meet up with them?
Yes, that is correct. So the court would place somebody on probation, and then we have certain conditions that we would monitor and work with them and refer them. And one of the providers that we work closely with is Fountain Centers.
And there are some unique, everybody, I'm coming out of a criminal situation has issues, but are there some common ones when you talk about people battling an addiction problem that are unique to them as far as living in society after conviction and now they're on probation?
Well, honestly, I hear a lot that, it's a blessing in disguise that I got caught. It's a blessing in disguise that I'm on probation because now I can finally get the help that I need. And we hear that quite often. And so it's an opportunity for us to, build that relationship with these people that we're working with, and then also work closely, like more of like a wraparound type, working with the counselors at Fountain Centers, or, sometimes they're battling mental health, so it could be a co-occurring disorder. So not only are we working with also the treatment provider, but it's, it's important for us to also work with anyone that's involved for mental health services as well.
And with the addicted person, would it be in simplification to just say the person you see in your office that you're meeting is an entirely different person than the one that was out there?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting, times when law enforcement will go out and do home visits with us, or if we do home checks, and interestingly, that person may apologize. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. The last time you saw me, I was under the influence. I was drinking or high or whatever. That's not me. I'm sober now. I'm doing good things. I'm in recovery. And so as a result, they're making different choices, better choices. So then their behavior changes and the relationships change and, everything around them changes.
And another thing that as a parent, you might be thinking this, a lot of folks, I might be thinking this, well, it could never happen in my family. We would make sure that never happened in my family. I know that's not true. It cuts across all lines, all people. You two are different family situations, but pretty darn normal. And, that happened, right? You run into all sorts.
Oh yeah, totally.
Same here?
Yes.
There's no socioeconomic or other difference, is there, Doctor?
Well, that's true. However, there are certainly issues that increase the risk for addiction. And that includes such things as starting at a very early age. And it's interesting that your two folks in recovery are very young people. And that's the nature of addiction. Addiction will unfold most dramatically when drug use is started at an early age. And that includes before the age of 15 will result in significant problems with addiction.
Does that include alcohol?
Absolutely,
okay.
Yes. Alcohol is one of the most damaging and addictive substances in our society. We tend to overlook that when we're talking about other drugs such as heroin and methamphetamine. Now, the other issue that is really, really important as well that predisposes people to addiction is having bad things happen to you in life. And so people say, well, it's an equal opportunity disease. In fact, those who have experienced abuse, neglect, poverty are at much greater risk for addiction than those who do not. Those who come from households where parents are using or parents have mental illness are at much greater risk for substance use problems and addiction later on in life. So parents, life circumstances, the community all have a significant impact in terms of whether or not substance use will unfold into addiction versus it being substance use and it's stopping there.
When you were using, did you just not even think about consequences? Was it like we were talking earlier, didn't want to feel sick, so you just kept using, or if you could talk about that?
I didn't care about the consequences. Once you're addicted to something, that's all you focus on, really, is that drug, that high, and just using it.
Were you functioning in society, like job, etc.?
For a little bit. I always thought I was a functioning addict, but there's no such thing. But yeah, that's how I thought I was, but it spirals out of control real fast. So.
Because the using, you're with heroin anyway, is my understanding that you feel real mellow and you don't do anything. Mm-hmm. I don't know, is that your experience or not? Or were you functioning in society?
Well, when I was using the most was in my senior year of high school. And I'd go out on my lunch break and get high and go back to school, and I'd fall asleep in class. And that was just a regular thing every day. I got fired from my job for stealing. You don't really care about the consequences. And I thought I was functioning too, but once I started doing more things like stealing and whatnot, I realized this thing has a grip on me and it's tight.
Did you have help in making that determination, or did you come to that yourself?
I came to that myself, I think. Every day I'd wake up and I knew I needed it. And I wouldn't go to school till I had it because I didn't want to be sick at school. That's when I really realized that my life was very miserable, and I started stealing checks and stuff like that. So
In order to find money to pay
Right.
for more.
Yep. And I don't know, that's how my parents found out that I was using is fraud checks. And that was a big eye-opener for me. That's when I first went and tried to get help. That's when I went to detox and went to outpatient, and for some reason I still wanted to use, because that thing in my head telling me, like, you don't know how to cope with your feelings. That's like how I felt. I didn't know what to do. I was experiencing a lot of feelings that I hadn't felt in almost a year from using, and
Learning how to live life again, really, and how to deal with people.
so for an addict, it's just easier to go right back into that way of life.
Samantha, did you have an aha moment or most recently, or?
I did. 2 years ago, well, almost 2 years ago, I was basically doing the same thing over and over and over again. You know, using, waking up, using, just this all day thing was using, you know, and I was having a conversation with somebody that I was close to, saying that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, living the same way over and over again. And by the grace of God, I say, I got busted. You know, I violated, and ever since then I've been clean, and I'm thankful for that, because all the other times that I was in trouble with the law, I didn't care. I didn't care about the consequences. I didn't care about anything. But this time I actually cared, because I wanted it for myself. And you have to want it for yourself, you know? If you don't, it's not gonna work.
Not for doing it
No.
for your parents or loved one
No.
or whatever, it has to be for you.
Nope, yep.
Did you find help? Was there anybody or group that helped you?
Yes, my recovery group, they helped me very good. They were there for me.
Like a 12-step type thing?
Yes,
Okay.
yep. And I went to a meeting straight every single day for 13 months. I jumped straight into it. I did the fellowship, I chaired meetings, I helped the newcomer. I would pick people up in the cities and bring them down here for different functions of recovery functions. I think that was the biggest thing that kept me clean, was just trying to help others that, you know, were struggling. And I don't know, it's the best thing truly that's happened to me.
Dr. Bruner, what about that? If somebody seeks help for an addiction problem and they want to come to Fountain, how do you know if they should be in there all the time or just come and go with a program? With these drugs, does some treatments work better than others?
Fountain Centers, we have a continuum of care, so we offer treatment at a residential level, and then we have an extended care program, and then we have outpatient. And really, when we're talking about drugs like methamphetamine and heroin, more often than not, folks who are addicted, where they experience the brain changes that your other guests are talking about tonight or during this program, when you experience those brain changes, people really need to be in a safe and structured environment in order to discontinue use. And sadly, what ends up with a lot of these folks is they start off in jail. And that's where they detox, and that's where they stop using drugs, and then it washes out, and there can be a return to some semblance of normality for them in terms of how the brain is working. But the longer a person is able to establish a period of abstinence from any drug, the greater their chances of maintaining that. So as Laura was talking about, for example, she stepped down very, very gradually from a very structured program to much less intensive, so that she's living in the community right now. And then as Sam's talking about, one of the things that she did was she surrounded herself with non-using people and got involved with a group of people who were also striving to maintain abstinence. So these are key issues as it relates to recovery from addiction. Lots of structure and support and containment early on, followed by lots of loving, caring people in your environment to help sustain that.
And Debra Schmitt, what about the different drugs and different needs of people? You know, it used to be with alcohol was the big problem, and they'd say 28 days and you're done, you know, but you're finding there are different needs for some of these other drugs.
Oh, absolutely. I believe, such as Dr. Brunner had talked about, Being in jail, in a perfect world, having somebody detox in jail for up to 30 days and then immediately going from jail to an inpatient program, some sort of residential. Because what we do find is the longer that they are sober, the longer and the more likelihood that they will continue in recovery. I also think it's important too, changing their playground, changing their playmates. And what I mean by that is taking them out of their environment. And if they do go to some sort of residential treatment, such as Laura had shared, she doesn't live in Austin anymore, she lives in St. Paul. And I think that that's important because it can be a trigger. If you're early in recovery, you come back to town, just maybe being in a neighborhood could be a trigger, or seeing somebody, or a smell, or a song, or something could be a trigger to use. And if you're in a weak moment, maybe you have some sort of stress or you're emotionally you're up here, or something's going on where maybe you're sad or what have you, that could drive back to that behavior, and that cycle then will continue.
A trigger can be anything. Can you relate to that?
Yeah, people, places, things. Coming to Austin, like when I first got out of treatment for home visits for Christmas and stuff, like it was a trigger coming home because I got here and my parents were too scared to let me out of the house, kind of. Like they won't, and I get it, they are scared. And so I sat in my car just kind of bored, listening to music, and that could be a trigger because I used to do that when I was using, but I would fall asleep and in my car while doing that. But just boredom is a huge trigger for me. Not so much anymore, but it really was.
And I suppose if you came back to town, I'm just guessing, but you're not used to living in this environment in a sober state. So that's, even in and of itself, can be a strange, hard thing to do. I don't know, did you have the trigger experiences?
Oh yes, I think every addict has triggers. It can be just certain songs, things that come on TV, it's just living life basically, certain things that you can walk by, a certain smell. There's just so many things out there that can be triggers, but it's how you learn to deal with those, feelings. When you get those feelings, boredom, keep yourself busy, especially when you're first in recovery, early in recovery. I think that is one of the most important things, is keeping yourself busy and structure. That's why I did a lot of the meetings and the functions and was trying to help out people, because it helped me to stay busy in a positive way.
Yeah, you have to do something,
Yes.
I suppose.
Change everything.
If we can pull back a little bit and talk about the public policy aspects of drug abuse and use in our society. Dr. Bruner, I know that the relationship between heroin and these opioid drugs partially has come about because of more prescriptions being issued for that type of medication for legitimate purposes, but it's become more and more used, and that is something where there may have to be some global changes, or that they're being talked about.
Yeah, and that's right, Eric. At a national level, prescription opioid pain medications increased dramatically in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And if you look at trend lines in terms of the increase of these drugs, it's incredible how many prescriptions have been written year over year over year. So that essentially we are dumping these opioids into our society, into our communities. They're everywhere. They're everybody's medicine cabinet, and they are very, very accessible. And it's only been recently where the federal government has begun to pay attention to that and introduce some policy changes to say, enough is enough. These medications have no business being used on a regular basis for pain that can be treated non-pharmacologically, without medications or with lifestyle changes and things like that. And only just recently have we seen a decrease in the number of prescriptions written, and hopefully that'll turn into a trend. Now, interestingly and of concern is that as these prescription opioids are leaving the marketplace, we're also seeing an increase in heroin. And so it might very well be that as these prescription medications become more expensive and more difficult to get, that people are driven to heroin, which is sold at a very low price to get people addicted, and then they're hooked.
So that's the connection. Many people start with a prescription for pain. That prescription goes away. They may or may not know that they were addicted, but now they sure as heck find out they are, and they reach out to something unbelievable as it may sound, folks, but more accessible than the medicine. Was that an experience that you know, or friends that experienced?
I know people who used to buy like oxys, and those are a lot more expensive than heroin. You pay almost like $1 a milligram or more, and heroin's a lot more accessible and cheaper.
And backing up, we talked about triggers, we talked about lifestyle. There's also just simple things. You did a forum not long ago in Albert Lee, and that you spoke and was very enlightening. One of the things that they used there was the group in Freeborn County has these little things, they call them conversation starters, and they're on a little ring binder. They have them in Freeborn County. We have them at KSMQ. We have a supply. You could stop in and get one. And all they are is things that I would say, if you're a parent or a friend of a loved one, it's questions on here to ask, getting them to talk about anything. The questions don't have anything to do with addiction. What's a really nice thing that someone has done for you? And just have that conversation with a child or a loved one in your vehicle if you're driving them from here to there. And on its surface, you think that's kind of goofy. It's just a bunch of questions. But, Deborah, we were saying it can get people talking, and that can help.
Oh, absolutely, especially, in parental roles, having that conversation with your children about drug use and abuse, and, early on as a parent, educating your kids about the dangers of drugs. And, for example, one of the questions is, how would you convince a friend to not use alcohol or drugs? I think that's a great question. How would you?
And it's not a question that I would just naturally come up with,
Right.
So it's here, and it would get you talking. That's for certain. Is talking in the doctor and the parental relationship, that's key, I suppose.
Yeah, the best thing that parents can do to help avoid drug use problems later in life is to establish a very strong connection, relationship, bond with your child early on, even just in general, to the extent that you bring in discussions or conversations around drug use and scenarios with how to avoid drug use, all the better. But the most important thing is to be able to set the stage so that as a young person, when an adolescent decides to experiment and use a drug, alcohol, marijuana, typically the drugs that kids will choose first, the parent then has the relationship established and can sit the child down and have a discussion, not a yelling match, but a discussion about the drug use incident, and then what we're going to do about that.
What about if somebody watching the program, kind of personalize it a little bit in the few minutes we have left, imagine somebody who is in the throes of the cycle of addiction. If there's one piece of advice you can give them, obviously you say seek treatment, but is there something that you can suggest down at that level, what they could do if they're watching right now?
If they know me or know my history, just to kind of look at me and where I was and where I am now, and I don't know, that help is out there, and people can change their lives at any time. It doesn't matter the age or anything like that, help, just seek help.
Mm-hmm. It can get better.
Oh yes, it does get better.
and Laura, you're out there helping other people in your job. You're working up in the cities, up in Roseville. What recommendation would you have for somebody that is watching and is stuck in that cycle?
Just reach out for help. Say a using friend of mine reached out to me, even though they're using, and if I know I'm at a good spot in my recovery, I'll bring them to a meeting if I can tell they're serious about it. I think it's really important to ask for help, and that's really what got me into recovery is asking my mom to drug test me, and that helped.
So she kind of became involved in that process, and you let her into that process, and then that helped get you the help you needed, the treatment, or what?
Yep, I told her, Mom, drug test me in a week, and so a week came, and she's like, okay, let's do it, and I wasn't clean, and reality hit, and my sister texted me, like, what do you want to wear to your funeral, because she used some other choice of language, but she said, because that's where you're headed, is she thought I was going to die, and reality really hit, and I realized I needed help, and I was miserable, so.
And you see people, Deborah, that we were talking that come back and see you and that are better. That must be pretty hopeful for you.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think, as probation officers, building that self-efficacy, believing in themselves that they can make that change.
Wait, what does that mean, self-efficacy? It's a
So-
technical term. Help me out there.
So self-efficacy is getting them to believe in themselves that they can make that change, that they can be successful, and there is hope. And utilizing support groups, like these two had talked about, the importance of finding that support group. And feeling connected, I think, is important, because if you look at another reason why people use is that social connection. And so if they can find social, connections in other areas, whether it's at support group meetings, whether it's maybe working out, joining a gym, something like that. Like one of you guys had touched on that, the boredom factor. So idle hands is a devil playground. So staying connected, getting involved. Having structure in your life, 90 meetings in 90 days. I have some people that do 90 meetings in 90 days. It's very helpful to them. And, so there is hope, and getting them to believe that. And so then when they are successful, they, feel good about themselves. They feel more confident, and they're thankful.
And it's a tough, what you professionals do is a difficult life in the profession. So you do get small rewards because they come back long after, and long after
Yes.
their service, and long after you're done with them.
Correct. Yes, I've had people use me as a resource for other areas that they were maybe struggling in, or I sometimes I get Christmas cards that say, thank you, you made a difference, which is really cool. And we do a lot of group work in our office, and we get people that they're really appreciative of the support that they get from groups and stuff that we run in our office, and they're very thankful.
I'm sure that's the same or similar at Fountains. There are some success stories, some not so successful, but you get good stories that people come back and talk to you about them.
Yeah, for sure. It's just wonderful when people return. To see two young people like this doing so well. It's just an awesome feeling when you're a provider and you have an opportunity to be a part of that. To answer your previous question, the shame and the self-doubt and how people beat up on themselves when they're in the throes of addiction, it is not something that people look back and say, I feel good about this experience. And what I'd say to folks is that it is not about you being a bad person. It's not about having some sort of character flaw. People are good even if they're using drugs. Sometimes they engage in bad behaviors, things that they shouldn't be doing, but they're good people. And the thing that we want to do, and the thing that we try to do, is show them that we care, show them that we're there, and I think our communities are recognizing this as well. We're approaching it from a more compassionate perspective anymore. And the more that people care about those who have addiction and bring them in and help them, as opposed to shunning them and making this a bad thing, then the more likely we are to achieve success.
A few resources for you folks before we head out. By the way, on these conversation starters, again, if you give us a jingle here at KSMQ Public Television, or stop by our office in the West Building of Riverland Community College, we have a supply of these thanks to the Freeborn County Human Services Department. Also, there's a phone resource. This is Fountain Center, where Dr. Bruner is. They have a 24-hour hotline that's answered all the time. That's why it's called a 24-hour hotline. Thank you very much. The phone number there is 800-533-1616, 800-533-1616. Other information for caregivers or folks close to someone who is struggling, drugabuse.gov and minnesotarecovery.org. That's an awesome website. Again, minnesotarecovery.org. It was real easy for me to navigate and to get information, you know, as a parent that helped me, but for anybody along the continuum of being swept into the addiction problem, minnesotarecovery.org. I want to really thank our guests. Hasn't it been a wonderful discussion? Laura Peters, thank you very much for coming down from the cities, both of you, and giving your story. And congratulations to you, Debra Schmitt from Mower County. Thank you. Keep on fighting the good fight, right? And Samantha Freeman, thank you. Congratulations also. And Dr. Bruner, very nice to have you with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
For now, I'm Eric Olson. We'll have these resource information on our webpage too, ksmq.org.
Circle of Hope.
Oh, and Circle of Hope too, of course. Check them out on Facebook. There is a local group of parents and caregivers who get together and meet locally. And that's called Circle of Hope in Austin in Mower County. And you can check them out on Facebook or call us here at the station. We have their contact information, but search Circle of Hope and you can reach out and talk to somebody in person. For now, I'm Eric Olson. Thanks for joining us for Drug Storm.